Now we're going to just take a moment to look at Mary. And just like we did with Thomas, I just want to give a little bit of background on Mary. Mary, we don't know very much about her from Scripture. We know very little, in fact. But we do know that she had 7 demons in her, and that Jesus cast them out and cared for her. And she was then, in response to that, she was then someone who cared for Jesus. And she helped him in his ministry. She was one of the few believers that was present at the cross. She was one of the few believers that went to the tomb. She was going to help with the burial rituals. And she was the first person to whom Jesus appeared after his resurrection, that is recorded in Scripture. And what an awesome honor to be the very first person to whom Jesus appeared. And so Mary, that's about all that we're told about Mary in the Bible. But this particular passage that we're dealing with this morning is a strange passage indeed. It says that she tried to hold on to Jesus. She was clinging to Jesus. And Jesus said to her, "Woman," in verse 17, "Woman, do not hold on to me, for I have not yet returned to the Father." And so there's been some debate about this passage. You might have heard some preachers or teachers or authors suggest that Jesus had not yet gone to the mercy seat and sprinkled his blood on the appropriate place. And it gets pretty technical, and I think that that's missing the point. I think that actually if we look at what this passage is really saying, he's not talking about just don't touch me, as if Mary's touch would have somehow tainted Jesus and rendered the cross ineffective. That's not the goal. That's not the point of this passage at all. The actual language here suggests that Mary was trying to hold on to Jesus to keep him there, and what he's really saying is not just don't touch me, but don't cling to me. Don't hold on to me. Don't keep me here, and don't keep yourself here. And so I don't think that the tone was stern, and I don't think that the tone was very aggressive. I think the tone was, "Mary, don't cling to me. There's things to do. Both I have things to do and you have things to do. And the best thing is not to just keep us here in a holy huddle." That's not what Jesus wanted for Mary or for himself. And so she tried to cling to Jesus, to keep Jesus for herself. And in doing so, she would have neglected her mission. She would have neglected her mission. Her mission at this point, what did Jesus tell her after he said, don't hold on to me, don't cling to me? He said, "Go instead to my brothers and tell them I am returning to my Father." Mary had a mission to be the first evangelist. Not only was she the first person to whom Jesus appeared, but she was the first sent out evangelist to tell the good news that Jesus was alive. And so she would have neglected that mission if she had continued to cling to Jesus. In a sense, there's nothing wrong with holding on to Jesus. There is something wrong with the idea that Jesus is staying in one place. Because Jesus too had a mission. He was going to go to his Father and then send the Spirit. So we often use the language, hold on to Jesus. That's appropriate language. But we should never think of Jesus as stationary. Jesus is not staying in one place. Jesus is going on a mission. Jesus is active. And he is moving out into the world through his Spirit. And so to hold on to Jesus is a form of travel. And so Mary would have been neglecting not only her mission, but would have been keeping Jesus from his mission. He goes with you, so don't worry about losing Jesus by not holding on to him and clinging to him in the way that Mary was. Jesus is on a mission. And just like Thomas, Mary eventually did obey and shared the good news with the others. She's the first witness to the resurrection, the first evangelist to Jesus' brothers. And so she has a privileged role. And so what I gather from these two accounts, this tension between inviting Thomas to touch him and almost rebuking Mary for touching him, is that there's two very different mistakes that people often make in regard to the resurrection. There is the skeptic, the doubter, who makes the mistake of not believing solid eyewitness testimony, as recorded in the Scriptures. It's the mistake of making belief in Jesus an impossibility based on your criteria for what will help you to believe. It's the mistake of being totally critical and not really open-minded to what happened truly in history. That's the mistake of Thomas. And if you make the mistake of Thomas here this morning, maybe there's some here in this congregation who, even though you're here this morning, you in your mind have still not allowed yourself to be open to the idea that God became flesh, lived and died, and rose from the dead, and that changes your life and world history. That changes everything. And maybe there are some here this morning who are still doubting Thomases. I urge you to touch the evidence, to see, to look hard at the evidence, the testimony of Scripture. The evidence of, we basically have three prongs of evidence. We have the empty tomb, nobody denied it. We have the appearances of Jesus. He appeared to many different people, and the testimonies are recorded in here. And, of course, we have the emergence of the church. How else do you explain this church, of this group of people, claiming that this man had risen from the dead in the same century in which, if it's not true, it would have been so easy to disprove. And so we have these three prongs of evidence. I urge you, if you have not yet submitted to the fact that Jesus rose from the dead, look hard at that evidence. Taste and see that the Lord is alive. Maybe there's some, more likely there's a lot here that are more likely to fall into the temptation of Mary and to make the mistake that Mary originally made here in this passage. The mistake of thinking that the best thing to do with Jesus is just to hold on to him in some kind of holy huddle and to try to keep Jesus in the walls of this building, this structure, this church. And we neglect to see that Jesus is on a mission and that Jesus, is, through his Spirit, is always going out and reaching more and telling the good news to others. And I think that there's a real temptation among Christians to make the mistake of clinging to Jesus and holding him in place. But Jesus is on the move. And so, are you prone to one of these mistakes this morning? Are you prone to doubt the resurrection of Jesus? Are you prone to try to hold on to Jesus and keep him here and keep your life comfortable and keep everything the way it is? Both of those are mistakes. Be like Thomas. Look at the evidence and confess that Jesus Christ is Lord and that Jesus Christ is God. Be like Mary. Don't try to hold Jesus in place and neglect your own mission to the world, but go and tell others the good news. Thomas and Mary, even though they had their moments of weakness and succumbing to temptation, they are great examples for us to follow this morning. So I hope that this has been helpful to you as you celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Just want to close us in prayer.